Philosophers.
Fauxlosophers.
Well, it's been a long time coming, David.
I know.
We've been having this idea for a while where one of us would take a stance on a topic that we either did or didn't agree with, that's irrelevant, and would try to defend the topic. And I think one of our first ideas for a show was one of these. The second idea we had actually on our topic list was one of these, and we've just been putting them off until now. And I guess I drew the short stick where I get to defend something first.
That's right.
So, David, what are you going to try to pick apart that I'm going to have to attempt to defend today?
You are going to defend copyright. Today.
Copyright. Okay. Well, let's start like we normally do. And let's talk about copyright. What is copyright?
I'd like to give a little bit of a brief history of copyright, actually, in lieu of just a straight-up definition.
Okay.
I can keep it brief. But basically, back in the days when the printing press was a new and exciting thing. Sorry, actually, we'll go before that. Before the printing press was a new and exciting thing, the only way to copy something was the exact way of making something originally. If I had a book, I wanted another copy of it to give my friend. Guess what? I got to spend a whole bunch of time writing another copy of the book. And hopefully I didn't screw up too badly. So this obviously takes forever, and mass production of books doesn't exist at all. Aside from, culturally significant texts like religious texts in which people basically dedicate their lives to making copies of the texts because, maybe they can get a few dozen ones done before they die.
And I think it's also interesting that a lot of these cultures, that's kind of how a lot of the religious officials of those days would begin. Their, tutelage is you copied it, and that's how you knew the material because you rewrote the whole thing, and then your classmates would spell check you by hand. So you spend half the day writing and half the day reading what someone else wrote and comparing it line for line with the one that you're both copying from. That your teacher or your master, who's now moved on from the tedious task of copying to, gone from that.
Right. So enter the printing press. A technological change which creates a big disparity between the efficiency of making one copy versus many. With the printing press, it is more efficient to make lots and lots and lots of copies. In fact, the more copies you intend to make, the more efficient the printing press becomes.
Yes.
And in fact, to make one copy, it's still more efficient to write it by hand than it is to do it on a printing press. But if you need only make a few dozen copies, the printing press is already leaps and bounds ahead. Because as soon as you set up one page, you can stamp it as many times as you want to your heart's content, as many as you think that you could sell, and then move on to the next one. And so, as the first publishing companies came into existence, there became a fierce, competition between them, and basically, if one got their hands on a copy of a book, then they might, start making their own copies of the same book to compete against them. And so, there were cries of foul. And so the notion of copyright was born, where basically, if whoever publishes a work, in this case generally a book, or only a book at this time, has a monopoly on publishing that book, either for a limited time or permanently. Pretty sure the original copyright laws were also all limited. As they are today. But now, the thing is that there is sort of a human, what is perceived to be a fundamental right to share information, of which copying is a subset.
I think we'll go there. That was
Yeah.
kind of where I was going to take
Okay,
it
so
first.
I'll take it. I'll step back from that and let you defend it the other way. But anyway, um, but basically, no one really objected to copyright at its inception because, well, copying for the everyman didn't change, and so
Well, still, just because there were more copies of books didn't mean more people were reading them anyway at this time.
this is true. But even putting that aside, the fact is that for everyone else, it didn't matter because you weren't planning to make your own copies of books anyway because it was immensely tedious
And printing presses were expensive
and printing presses were
and
expensive.
really hard to make. And so it was mainly a corporate game at that time. If you can call a medieval or a guild game,
Right. So now enter the next technological innovation. Innovation. The computer network.
Okay, you skipped a bunch of them, but okay.
Okay. The next one that's relevant.
Well, it's movable type text, but we'll go on from there, I guess.
Sure. Well, okay.
But long story short, there were steps and steps and steps where it became easier and easier
I guess
to make copies.
the reason why the computer network is the next one that's important is because it's the first one that really improved the efficiency of one-off copying.
Okay.
That now to make one copy is basically just as easy as making many copies, and they're both very efficient now.
Right, and not only that, but now it's more effective to make a copy sometimes than it is, and then get rid of it when you're done with it. Like they're disposable at this point. Where on a computer you can make a copy of something and work with it or read it, and when you're done, just delete it. And then when you're ready for another copy, you just go make another one, and you don't lose anything from deleting this. Because it's not.
As long as you haven't lost the original, it doesn't matter.
Exactly. And so that's, I guess, where I see where you're taking it at this point. We've crossed another threshold almost where it's become literally disposable. Even the moment the original is finished, copies are disposable.
Right. So, and now that's what makes copyright now controversial, where it was basically the only people who could have cared about it back in the day were publishing companies. Now everybody cares about it because everyone can copy for basically nothing.
Not only that, but there's, I think, also other people that I think cared in a roundabout way, even at that time, were people who created the original as well. Maybe not to the same degree, but today the ability to generate an original and have the ability to distribute it it's almost a one-to-one. Like if I can create an original, I can distribute it as many times as I want now. So I can have both. People, I think, are now in a place where they're on both halves of the coin when it comes to the original and copying. You can care about it as much because you're empowered by the modern world to have a creative influence. I think you see this with things like YouTube's a good example. The YouTuber job. People who create originals that haven't written a book, they've not put the time in to write a book or make a quality production. You could get a cheap webcam or maybe some cheap microphones and, talk into them for a while and
call it Fauxlosophers.
And before you know it, you can throw it up on a server thanks to someone else and it be copied essentially, which is what happens thousands of times to whomever wants to see it, So it's, I think, on both sides, people are caring more about it because not only is copying just something we can just do, but creating is something we can just do as well. It doesn't take the same amount of, the risk is not as high for attempting to create something that might want to be consumed.
Right, because now I don't have to go convince some publishing company that my thing is good and they should distribute it.
Exactly. Back in the days of the printing press, Gutenberg had to, okay, we're going to make 1,000 copies of this book. That's weeks of time and labor and months maybe even, once you consider how many pages there are and you have to carve out each page on this block that's only good for so many pages before it gets dull and the text gets bad. and then there's ink involved, there's material costs involved, and you have to know in advance. The publisher is the one who generally takes the risk on that and goes, I'm going to put the money up front to buy the materials to make all these copies, and then I'm going to get my share when they sell. But since I'm assuming the highest majority of the risk, I get to assume, I get to pick and choose who gets to get printed for that reason as well. Plus, I own the printing press, so of course I can. But now, everybody owns their own virtual printing press in the form of a computer, mostly, or has access to one. And so there's really not a whole lot of need for publishers like that anymore in the digital space.
No. In fact, the closest thing that we have to a publisher now is basically like hosting platforms like YouTube.
Right. But even then, that's a pretty fair game for anybody for the most part. And, we post our podcast to YouTube and it doesn't cost us anything. Even though there's a lot of hard work going on in the background that they did pay for, the amount of cost that would be forwarded into us for the amount of burden we're putting on that ability is pennies, and it's not even worth the time to assign someone to try to figure that out. So I think it's on both sides, but I do agree with your point that people care a lot more about it now from the consumer side of copyright as opposed to the creator or producer side of copyright. That has increased from essentially 0 to nearly the max. Whereas on the other side, it was not quite 0, but has now gone up to not quite 100%,
Right. Okay. So we've at least briefly mentioned actually what copyright is. So we'll say it succinctly now. Copyright is legislation which grants the publisher or author of a work a limited monopoly on its distribution.
Yes. Okay. So what's your problem with that? And what's your problem with that, I guess? Since I'm defending it, I'm going to let you
attack it.
I'm going to sit back and not give you the advantage of me trying to defend it ad nauseum. So.
Okay. So as was mentioned previously, sharing information on its face is pretty universally seen as a human right. I can tell you what I want. And so copying of written information is just a more sophisticated way of sharing information. And furthermore, copying of digital information, likewise. And so in the past, while nobody cared if we had to give up that right to, for some publishers to argue with one another about who gets to copy what, because none of us at home could copy. Now we can, and so it is now a burden on society rather than a sure. Rather than some sort of boost to productivity, it's a burden on society that people now have to sacrifice their ability to share information at will because an outdated law is perpetuated.
Okay. The issue I take with that is, first of all, there's no principal attack on why copyright is right or wrong in what you've said thus far. You've not told me whether or not... The closest you've gotten is telling me that copyright is an infringement on the freedoms of individuals to share information, right? And in a way, it is. I'll concede that point. I have to. There's no way I can say that it doesn't. However, I would like to take this to a different place where copyright, as it exists, overcomes another human shortcoming. The copyright exists because of the way by which humans typically share and... Well, okay. Humans are motivated by mostly gain. Then, would you agree?
Sure.
Okay. The the thing about copyright is it allows someone to attempt something with a limited promise on return as a motivation. Otherwise, I think it could be said that humans would not otherwise be motivated to produce if there weren't some type of gain in it for themselves. And so pragmatically, ideally, yes, copyright is an infringement, but practically speaking and pragmatically speaking, it's protection for those who would engage in a venture. It would offer a sense of security in the event of success and guarantee you a limited amount of success on your risk to put forth the time and effort to create the original in the first place. Because that's the thing, you can't have copyright without originals. There's no point. Like, one's predicated on the other. Because of that, I think the best defense for me is to look at this from the standpoint of those who generate the original thing that is to be copied, right? Copyright, anyway. So, and from their perspective, there has to be some type of motivation. Now, copyright doesn't encourage that. Copyright doesn't provide the motivation to create the thing. Instead, it protects the motivation to create the thing, because no one says, because copyright exists, I'm going to make this, insert consumable, mostly media right now, because that's what we're talking about. It's the thing most commonly spread through the internet, or data. I'm not going to assemble data in a certain way to be digested by other people because I know that no one else can steal it. They go forth and make it public and available to other people because they know they will be able to benefit from it. Because there's this secondary human thing that goes along with being motivated by gain, and that's protection. And there's this nasty human tendency to, if I can't have it or benefit from it, you shouldn't be able to have and benefit from it. And so there's nothing to keep a person from putting together something really useful that they could monetize if they so chose. But if they're not going to make any excess money from it, keep it for yourself and experience the personal benefit you would get from it. And in the case of software, which I think we need to go there, because that's really where the rubber hits the road, in my opinion, because software is a machine. It's a non-physical process in the likeness of a physical machine. I can use that to get an edge over someone else. If I can't guarantee that I can make money on the process through distributing it, I can make money on keeping it to myself and not distributing it. And I think that's at a bigger disadvantage to people, because a lot of the software we take for granted these days, word processors and stuff like that, all had copyright protections. So people made them available to the public instead of each company, like a newspaper, wanting a good way to consolidate their work. It's mostly typed work, consulting out a software person to write software just for them to use. Then I think that's where I'm going to come at it from. And I'm not going to keep rambling on too much because I want to let you be able to, pick the points apart as they come out.
Okay. So, I'll come at this from two ways. First, I'll argue from history. Let's think about, works of the past prior to copyright. If people are not motivated to make things without a ban on unauthorized copying, then why were those works created before copyright was a concept?
Is that rhetorical, or are you asking me to give an example of why?
I mean, you could give an example.
Okay. Well, as we alluded to earlier, a majority of the written texts before, or at least a majority of the existing physical copies of texts, were religious in nature. And yes, religion is one of those other human aspects that isn't necessarily logical. People made them and distributed them because they wanted to maybe advance their religion. And there's maybe political motivations there, because in historical human societies, religion and politics were inseparable in a lot of ways. And so by propagandizing your religion or proselytizing your religion in written form, you could bring more people into the fold and exercise a greater control over a population. There's something to be gained by that. And if you maintain a artificial monopoly by force of just killing anybody else, because you could, if you're a king and you are the god king, which was a common concept we saw in many prehistoric religions. Egypt is a good example. Pharaoh was god and king. In their language, the priests were the ones who made the copies of the hieroglyphs and on using reeds and I forget what it's called, the papyrus paper, one of the oldest examples of writing on non-stone. You can use that to advance your political gain. There's still something to be gained there. And there were monopolies enforced physically back then by governments even then. There was a form of copyright that even existed back then. But what modern copyright does that doesn't do is it make it available protection for anybody, not just a specific class of people. Now, I can't say with exact certainty, of course, that all works like that were created for just that purpose. Another example, artistic renditions like Greek plays existed before copyright, and those plays were codified. People wrote them out. We have copies today that we preserved and of those.
Okay.
And those are mainly for historical purposes. But most of people who generated originals, they were of a group of people that were beyond, because of the nature of you had to be educated to even be able to create a written work. In that example, you probably weren't relying on your ability to write as your sole source of income. You probably were wealthy enough in an established class where you were always going to be in a place. So copyright is a protection for those who don't have those assurances to take the risk. Whereas back then you could have a pseudo non-codified law of copyright being enforced by essentially the class structures of the days or even political and religious systems, power structures that dominated throughout society prehistorically, I will say.
Okay, let's take the modern equivalent of this,
Okay.
which exists in the software world, and although this is not my preferred term to use to avoid going into a totally irrelevant discussion about terminology, I will call it the open source movement.
Okay.
In which is largely perpetuated by people who are creative for creativity's sake, create software that they want to use and think other people want to use. And if they do get money for it, it's only because other people wanted to give them money for it and not because they demanded it under threat of legal penalty.
Okay, what about it? What are you saying, I guess? What's your point?
I guess my point is that this is a real world example where even in today's world, people are willing to make things that, yes, previously were, or by previously I mean like in the 70s and 80s, were generally only made by companies who were seeking to leverage copyright. People are willing to make these utilities or other computer programs for the public to use, and are not doing so. They may be doing it for gain, but they're not. They don't seek the protection of copyright in order to do it. So I guess my point is that this is a counterexample to the claim that people don't want to make things without that motivation.
Well, I will say there is another motivation that's lying there. I don't know enough about the types of open source software being developed. That's to say. I would tend to say, because one of the examples I have in my mind, I forget what it's called, OpenVPN, for example. VPN is a service, for those who don't know, that allows you to privately browse the internet, and it allows you to essentially set up VPN, standing for Virtual Private Network, allows you to tunnel your information and appear under a different IP address. In a nutshell,
It creates a virtual representation of a LAN, a local area network, but over the internet using an encrypted channel.
Right, and through that encryption, you're protected from man-in-the-middle attacks, things like that, okay? I would say that a reason that things like that exist, though, is by making something open. Like, OpenVPN is regarded as one of the safer VPNs in existence. Would you agree?
Sure.
The reason for that is because it's open source, anyone can contribute a protection against an exploit, whereas you don't have to pay someone to add an exploit. In a way, people are motivated to make it open because if one person created OpenVPN and they were the only one that contributed to it, it wouldn't be as good as it is because they alone do not have the time resource or maybe even the skill to plug all of the vulnerabilities. However, they seek the help of others. It's open because they don't want to because they can't do it themselves.
Yes, okay.
And they want to have something else out there. And so it's more on the production side of you gain the benefit of essentially, instead of crowdfunding money for your project, for something you want to exist, your crowdfunding effort.
Yes. So this is a one of the big reasons why somebody would want to do that. But there also exists programs which exist that are open source that really could not exist for this purpose. Like a VPN is, for all intents and purposes, security software. And so yes, of course, you have the motivation to want to crowdsource the skills of others to plug holes in your security software. But what about software that is basically not involved with security at all, like word processors?
Okay. I suppose that would depend. I mean, off the top of my head, I could think of a couple of reasons that people would be motivated to do such. One is cultural, I will say. One thing I've noticed a lot about the open source movement is hacker culture. And I mean that by the traditional definition of the word hacker. A hacker is a person, or a hack is doing something in an unconventional way that was once thought either impossible or really difficult, made easy. Impossible and done, or really difficult, made easy. Would you accept that as a rough definition of what a hack would be?
Sure.
Okay. A lot of people that I know in the open source culture, and the feel I get from browsing the Reddits involved with it, a lot of these people are proud of what they're able to do. And it's a way of competing almost socially instead of for money. And so they do these things for a personal gain. And I would argue that probably a lot of these people, you have to be good at programming in general to even be able to do this. So most of these people, I would wager, probably have jobs where they make money making copyrighted software, and then they go home at night and work on something they want to work on. It's almost like a combination of an artistic expression, which for the longest time is something that people have just done, even, and I'm talking more about the artistic expressions like, song, dance, and such like that, where even before we had the ability to record these things, people would just do them for fun. And if you were good at it, other people would want to come see you, or they would want to join with you and collaborate. And same way with software in this case, is they're not doing it because they absolutely need a good word processor. Good word processors exist, copyrighted and open source even. But even the ones that are copyrighted, the monetary cost is due because of competition is minuscule compared to what it was. And these people we're talking about still, I think, could be emblematic of the class example from earlier. They don't need to do this to survive. They don't need to do this to compete in a marketplace to make money. There's not that ambition there. Most of these people probably are already of the class that compete just fine in the economy that has copyright involved in making money, and they do this on the side because they enjoy it. And there's nothing wrong with doing something to enjoy it. And I would not argue, just because I'm walking close to it, I'll go ahead and say it. I don't think that copyright should be forced on anyone. Like, I don't think you should have a guaranteed copyright and that someone, not you, can claims, copyright for you on your behalf without your request. I think if people choose to make open source software, that's fine. But for those who want to pursue the copyright protection option, I think it should be available to them. Because not everything is done for just fun. And some people might want to make money on something and not want to take the higher risk of doing it for free and hoping people will donationware, for example, taking that route, or just doing it open source and throwing it out there and feeling good about themselves. Emotional capital is a thing, but not being able to put food on the table.
Right. So a common assumption, which you've just made, is that the only way to really make money beyond donations is to make proprietary software and sell copies or whatever. But that's not the case. There exists plenty of companies which make all their money developing open source software. We'll take prominent examples, Red Hat Incorporated or SUSE, who make suites of open source software and make millions of dollars doing it.
Sure, by supporting it.
By supporting it, or doing what is actually the majority of the software development industry, which is accepting money for customizations.
Okay. I see what you're saying there. And that's fine. And I think that should be available as well. And I think that's a good use of it. However, I think the same system can be achieved under copyright.
Oh, it definitely can be achieved under copyright, but we are arguing whether copyright is necessary.
Okay, I guess we need to reframe. I would not say that copyright is necessary.
Okay.
I would just say that copyright should be an option that should exist. Because principally speaking, copyright is a violation of individual freedoms to share knowledge. So it's bad and on principle shouldn't exist. However, the pragmatic case I think can be made that it should be allowed to exist. That's the angle I'm trying to pursue here. Would you agree, or would you like to continue the discussion under a different scope? Because I think we may have gotten off on the wrong foot as far as what we were arguing.
We may have, because basically the angle I'm coming from is it's a violation of human rights. If it's not necessary, we shouldn't do it.
Okay, so no, I think we continue to have the discussion, because what I'm saying is it should still be allowed to exist even though it does violate human rights, even though it's also not necessary. It should be provided as an option.
Why?
But that's the argument we're having.
Sure.
Right? And the reason I want to provide it as an option is because I think people should be allowed to... I think this ultimately comes down to... essentially individual protection against the masses of people. For example, the individual creating the song or the movie or the software or the book, whatever, by creating that work, they've put forth time and effort. Now I believe, and they do have a monopoly on it until they make it public, right?
Right.
So, privately speaking, they have the monopoly and it's theirs. And at that point, copyright's like insured to them because it's theirs. It wouldn't be called copyright because it's not been copied yet. Okay, I get that. So, in a world without copyright, let's go there. I create this amazing software that I'm looking at this and go, man, this would solve a big problem. Which most big money-making things do that. They solve a problem because people will pay to circumvent a problem or to solve it in their own lives or in their business, say. So I created the software that solves this huge problem for some industry. Well, I want to make money off that. So I can release it open source and offer customizations for it. That's one option. That's the most common option. You said for monetizing open source software, for example?
Well, I don't know. I don't know what the most common option is in open source. What I do know is that the most common way that money is made in the software industry overall, open source or proprietary, is by offering customizations.
Okay, but the difference between the ability to, but the difference is who gets to decide who's doing the customizing.
Yes.
And that's the thing. I can decide who gets to customize it if I copyright it. And
Right.
I can and I could say, no, you got to pay me to customize it, and then I could take a percentage and sub it out to someone else. Who in the open source system, the other person could be like, hey, just pay me that rate. That minus his 10%. I can go 90% of what he's going to pay, and I'll just do it direct.
Right.
We'll cut the middleman.
Correct. So, and now there's competition,
Right.
which is good.
Well, no, I think there's still competition even in a copyrighted world.
Well, you're right, but okay. So I guess here's what I'm saying is that now basically you've made the case to me that more money is to be made doing this. So what? Just because something is more profitable doesn't mean that it's better.
No, but because something is better, it will generally be more profitable. The profitability of something. Okay, for example, if I solve this problem, if I'm the first person to solve this problem, yes. But if I'm not the first person to solve this problem, let's take an example from popular culture. I create a compression algorithm. There are tons of them out there. There are open source out there. There are proprietary out there. There are home rolled ones out there. This isn't a new game. But I come up with one that does it more efficiently than anyone else. I've competed and won. Like at that moment I've created it, I'm the best. Because it's that good, it's more profitable so long as I can monetize on it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that incentivizes someone else to say, but if I can be better than him, I can take his market share. That's where the competition within the copyright world is coming from. I don't want to do just like he did. Copyright, if someone else could just copy it, yes, I'm also motivated to not take the risk to even go down the venture in the first place if I'm relying on this as a means by which to support myself. But also, no one else out there who would have wanted to compete to do it is, they say, oh, well, this is good enough. We find ourselves, I think we would easily find ourselves in a place where we would only be bonding together to solve the bigger problems. We wouldn't be solving problems for those who are willing to pay for it and driven by the market. It's not, but the other person who wants to come in and say, yeah, well, I can do better than he did, and there's a monetary reason to do that. And if I risk the hours and effort and maybe hire some people to help me do it, I'm betting on that market share and that capital. And since it's better, it's more profitable and I can make more money, and thus I can risk more. The entry for risk is, if the reward's higher, you can accept a higher barrier of risk to do it. If it's a thin margin, why would you? And so in that world, I come up with a compression algorithm. I'm going to unleash it as a copyright software, and while the competition for customization has been killed because I created it, the competition for generating original solutions is preserved. You see what I'm saying? And in the practical case, there's a finite pool of human resources effort to solve problems. We can either divert them to customizing things that already exist and maybe making small improvements here and there. But even then, once I make those small improvements, then they're there.
So maybe I need to clarify something. When I made my claim about the majority of the software industry, what I didn't mean to say was that it's creating customizations. What I mean to say is that it's creating custom software, whether it is customization to something that exists or new from the ground up.
Okay, in that case, I can go there too. If I create something for someone else, right? Say I'm hired by somebody and they're like, hey, I'll pay you up front. So I've got the food and mouth. I'm not worried about that right now. And they want a software that does a thing, right? They're going to pay. What are they paying for? Are they paying for just that software? Are they paying to have that software made just for them?
Maybe. It depends on how you negotiate the contract. You may, in order to get the contract, need to make a deal that for basically make your own private copyright, essentially, by saying, I'll make this for you and I will agree not to disclose it to anyone else for so-and-so amount of time.
Sure, and I think because private copyright exists in the pragmatic world in which, okay, I say we do the private copyright route,
Which is just a contract.
it's just a contract. Someone else violates the term of that contract. That's neither of us. Someone else gets their hands on my code and starts copying it and distributing it as their own product, right? No one, me or the company, violated the terms of the agreement.
Then how did the third party get it?
Stole it,
Okay.
for example.
Mhm.
Okay. So is either one of us held responsible for its theft?
No.
Okay. But I'm still out money. They're still
Well,
out
actually,
money.
maybe actually. It depends on how they stole it. Did they get physical access? Did they break
I
a
don't know.
computer network? I guess at some point we could
I don't want to
assign.
go too far down into specifics. But
Sure, yeah, but we could in principle also assign blame to whoever failed to secure the information
Okay.
because they had agreed to keep it from others' hands.
Okay, so we bring blame down on them, but we still have the problem that my software is everywhere and I can't sell it anymore. And because it's so copyable,
Mm-hmm.
it's just out there now. And I'm out money for it. And sure, you can punish the guy who stole it for stealing it, but
You can punish the guy who stole it for stealing. Well, no. Okay, he's not involved in the contract. So under this contract system, you can't punish the guy who took it. But you can punish the person who leaked it by accident or otherwise. Basically, take it to civil court, assess for your losses, and get your money that way.
okay. What are my
Because
losses, though?
Well, your losses were determined in the contract when you agreed for how much you would get paid for doing it and your time estimates for how long you thought it would take you to do it.
Okay. But that's not the value, though, of what I sold.
What does value mean?
What people are willing to pay.
You
And you don't-
negotiated what people are willing to pay in the contract.
Right. What the value was between me and the other party.
Mm-hmm.
Once something's leaked onto the open market, the market determines what its value is.
Right.
Regardless. So I could have gotten a really good contract and the market wouldn't have paid that much for it, but this guy did. So yeah, that's a good deal. Or I could have gotten screwed and the market would have paid much more for that. It's a more controlled risk in that case. But now that it's out in the public, its value, true value, is known by, or let's say instead of him taking it and just distributing it for free, he's selling it, right? The third party that stole it. Quickly, you can determine what its value is.
Okay. But hang on though. We're in a hypothetical world without copyright.
Yes.
So he's selling it, but this is apparently software that
Well, he's selling it. Well, he's making individual one-to-one contracts with other people.
Contracts, okay.
And he has now got my code that I wrote and completed for these guys, and he stole it, and now he's making one-to-one contracts with all my clients' competitors. But instead of having exclusivity, even if he didn't have even if he did have exclusivity, he can now leverage this with someone else whom he can, even if he makes the same amount that I did, he didn't put forth any effort to make it.
And so then the notion of compensation comes into consideration. So I would like to call into question the legitimacy of the concept of compensation.
Well, honestly, it's irrelevant, I think, in this case, because the reality of the matter is my compensation is alien from what I make in the event of a one-to-one contract, because the product I'm creating's valuation and my compensation are one-to-one because I'm being contracted to do it. Now, in his case, he didn't generate anything. He's being compensated for something that he didn't create. He just has a copy of. And he's competing with me now. Is essentially his theft competing against my productivity. Because I could always, as the producer, come up with something better. I mean, I did it once. Could I do it again? But that's a terrible argument because you never know about that.
Right, maybe you really did discover the greatest compression algorithm mathematically possible.
And it's going to be the last one ever. So
Sure.
and he's kind of cashing on it more than I will.
So the thing is that he's not doing zero work.
Well, yeah, he's working.
He's doing all the work of finding contracts and negotiating and managing to get people to agree to pay him for some information that he's in possession of.
Sure, but I did the same thing. I had to find the contract. If I came up with the idea, then yeah, I did the
Correct.
same thing.
You found the contract which paid for you to make the thing in the first place, and then somebody else illegitimately got their hands on it.
Right. And because of the illegitimacy, they're going to now make as much money or more money as I am, even though I think the case can simply be made that I did more work than he did. You don't know, but I'd say in this hypothetical scenario, we spent the same amount of time lobbying between different, industries, and we spent the exact same amount of time, and we got paid the exact same for the product that we then transferred to them, right? The difference was, before the product existed in its form, I put forth all the effort and was compensated up to that point. He's being compensated at the same rate with a different compensation to effort ratio in this case. And that doesn't stick well with me. That does not seem fair or right or correct.
But this is basically the notion of compensation then, that because you did work, then you are owed something.
No, that's not at all what it is. I did work for what I wanted to be paid. An exchange was set up. I fairly got paid for what I produced. I lived up to my end of the contract that was promised, and so did the other company by paying me. It was determined at that time what we were going to do. Now, and we could go into the hypotheticals about this all day, but what I'm saying is, at some point, I think, would you agree that the person who stole the software and then sold it, did they commit a crime by doing that?
No, I don't think so. I think the only one at fault is whoever basically broke the contract and put the information in that person's hands,
even if they did it unwillingly.
Right.
All right, but who did they? But say we did that, me and this other partner, right? That I did my contract. So we have a built-in mechanism to pay me then, say, right? Say we negotiated on the contract that it's their duty to keep this to themselves, so that after a year I could then go to their competitor and work with them one-to-one, one at a time with the same contract. Let's just say that was the terms. And the person I engaged in business with thought that was fair, because they get a year leg up, and then I get to keep making money after a year and go work with their competitor, and they're fine with that, whatever, right? So I don't know what their competitor would have paid me, right? Unless we assume all deals are public, which we talked about privacy. Even though that guy stole something, his deal with that other company is between him and that company. So that's valuation I've lost out on because I held the monopoly. I held the monopoly on what I had, and I sold.
So basically, you're taking the notion of stolen business and saying that you are owed for this.
I guess what I'm saying though is, it's kind of hard to not just define it by itself, essentially, because that person. What I'm pissed off about is that person violated my privacy by stealing something that was mine that I did not choose to be released to the public, and violated the monopoly over my property.
Okay, I see where you're coming from now. And okay, so I will revise my previous statement that this person did not commit a crime. I would say that what's wrong about it is not that he
made money,
and not that he acquired that information, but the means by which he did it.
Right.
So either by violating someone's privacy by breaking a computer security system, or breaking into somebody's house to.
Let's say you broke into my house, and
right?
Got it
and took it off your hard drive.
Right.
Yeah, right. So the problem there is unauthorized entry to your property.
Right. And not only that, the fact that he made money on it is kind of irrelevant at this point. But the problem is, say he stole something that belonged to me. Like, he violated my property and took something that belonged to me, or he saw something that I didn't want him to see, right? Like, that's essentially, I think that's more where we would have to look at it, because according to the principle...
okay, so yeah, I see where you're going here, but I hesitate to agree with the verbiage that by making a copy of information that he took something that belonged to you.
And that's why I'm backing off of it and saying, okay, he violated my privacy, and he saw something that he shouldn't have seen that I didn't want him to see. For example, say I painted the most beautiful painting ever, he saw it and was like, holy, that's beautiful. And then he goes home and paints, say he's got a photographic memory and he goes home and paints the same thing. It's like, well, he didn't steal the painting, he just made a copy of it in a really, roundabout way, say. Okay. I guess at that point, the thing about it is, what's the restitution for violating my privacy?
I don't know. What's the restitution for violating privacy normally?
I don't know.
I don't either.
But the other thing too is, what benefit did they have for violating my privacy? Violating my privacy. Does that factor in at all?
I don't think so. I don't think that's a fair way of looking at the damages that somebody has done. Like, you can't say that because you have profited this much from this crime, that is how much you have damaged the other person.
Maybe not. What I'm saying though is, when you're having to address the problem at that level, it's harder than just treating intellectual property as physical property. I don't think that much more is lost. In the pragmatic game, you have to be almost utilitarian with the way you look at things, even though I think we both agree that utilitarianism is not the best way to look at anything. But pragmatically, that's what you're doing. And I think that dealing with it through copyright is a better way of mitigating the problem or seeking restitution. Like, in a world where copyright exists, he steals it anyway, tries to use it, he just can't. Because it's mine, I copyrighted it. I made it knowledge to everybody that, hey, this is mine. You don't know what it looks like on the inside, but this is what it does. I put something in here and something comes out the other side. It's a black box, essentially. It's how software is usually treated under copyright anyway. Black boxes that you don't know how it works, but it puts something in, something else comes out the other end. Don't copy this. I'm going to sell it as though it's a physical product. Treating it like that is a much easier way to deal with the restitution side of things. For example, I don't have to determine, the market determines what the restitution is by the value of the thing. You let the market determine the value, not the individual from whom it was stolen, and really not even the individual who stole it, because the market will decide. And at that point, it's public. In the case that it would become public, then it's definitely the market deciding, because this person's out there selling it. I can copyright claim that and just seize the profits, because that's the value he stole from me, or that's the value that he gained from violating my freedom, of privacy, I would say. There's value there. And what keeps it from being subjective value is letting it be subject to the market, which is objective. Well, more objective than a single person's subjective opinion, And in the same vein, if he steals something that's pretty much, if he sees something that he thinks is amazing and it's actually worthless, then no harm would have been done to me from that. Because ideally, I think when you're dealing with this type of justice, it's, you want to restore things to the way they should have been, right? Well, the way things should have been is, if I was going to sell this thing, I would have made that money, assuming I just opened it onto the marketplace. And if he did the same thing, I think we're still going to have to get into the weeds on, yeah, well, he added X value to it by marketing it in this way. So he actually doesn't owe you what effort he put into marketing the thing. Okay, so you deduct that from what was sold, but
So
I think we're at least in figures here. We're not in. I'm not just stuck here with my schlong in my hand, like with nothing to do anymore, and that's that.
so we're running a little bit long.
Well, that's okay. It's a good topic.
Sure. But what we have failed to cover, I think, at this point is so you've been making a case for why copyright is good for authors.
Yes.
But what has not been brought up and defended against is how copyright is bad for everybody else.
I thought you'd go there. And all I have to say to that really is they don't matter. And it is good for them because they get to determine how much it costs. If I own something and I have a copyright for it, I can set the price at whatever I want because I have a monopoly. So we say, from copyright. Limited copyright, I have a limited monopoly. But that doesn't mean people will still pay the price I set for it.
Correct.
And again, I think for the sake of discussion, we would need to exempt all necessities from this for now. Keep it where copyright is normally applied. You know, for instance, you can't copyright water sources and things like that.
Of course not.
So I can't leverage basic human need against it. I'm leveraging human desire. And if I can hold the monopoly on that and people will pay it, it's their fault. I didn't force them to pay that price. I'm not taking their money. They could be patient and wait for my copyright to run out, or they can just say I'm not going to buy it at that price, and even though I have the monopoly, I'm squandering it by leaving it at the price that's high. I'm still going to have to come to market and sell it for what it's going to sell for at least a limited time. Or someone else is going to come up with something better just by knowing the idea of what I had exists and finding a better way to solve my problem. I'm still forced to sell it, and I'm still controlled by the market. And I think the market's the biggest benefit to the consumer. You know,
Sure.
They don't get something for free, but the market wouldn't allow it to be free anyway in a true market.
Sure. And I'm not demanding that things be free either. So the case that I would like to make is that even despite this, the implications of copyright end up limiting those who are not authors in ways that I think are unjust. So, for instance, we'll take an analogy, and you may or may not accept this analogy.
I'll let you know.
So, consider an automobile. I will use the automobile analogy.
Okay.
If I have a problem with my automobile, I can take it to whatever mechanic that I want. And I'm not required to bring this back to the dealer. Or let's say that, as in the case of a software developed by a person, not some big company. This is a very special car, a one of a kind that an engineer has put together. And okay, now I have an incentive to go back to the engineer for work on this car because he's the one who made it. He knows it inside out. But suppose something happens to the engineer.
Okay.
Now I need to take it to somebody else. Okay. But under the notion that the design of the car is your property, I can't take this to whoever I want.
Why not? It's not wrong as long as he doesn't try to copy the design.
But in the software world, he does not have. He's actually not allowed access to the design in order to make any changes that need making. Right.
Well, for the way it's handled right now, yes. But that's not an issue, I don't think, with copyright. That's an issue by the way the copyright is enforced and that's an issue in the way that we try to keep copyrighted materials copyrighted through secrecy and privacy like that. You know, again, in an ideal world, you could run every piece of code running on any, you could just validate any piece of code against, is this a 99% or greater match against what I did? If it is, then it's reasonable to assume that it's what I made and it's my design. I think the analogy's bad. I'll be honest.
Okay.
I don't like the analogy of the car because the car is a physical object.
Okay. Imagine a car that you can copy without destroying the original.
Well, the car, then it would have been broken from the beginning. You bought it broken. If you had a problem with it, you bought it that way. That's your fault.
I didn't buy it broken. Okay. Let's take it away from there's a problem with it and say I want to change it.
Too bad.
Yeah, why? Why can't I put bigger mirrors on my car? Or whatever it is that I want.
I guess you can. You can build things to go around it, but you can't change the... Okay, I see what you're saying. That would change the design of the car, though, because the mirrors were already built in. Okay, you can add new mirrors to the car, but you can't remove the ones that were existing.
Why not?
Because
I don't like them. They're ugly.
Well, okay, but it's even then, still in this analogy, you still paid for the car already, right?
Sure.
All right, then yeah, you can pay someone else to change it.
But that's not how copyright works.
Right. Okay.
I can't pay someone else to change it because you own it. It is your intellectual property according to the concept of the law.
See, that's where I begin to take issue with it as well. I'll be honest, I take issue with that as well because that's not...
That is the notion of intellectual property.
That's right, but we're not talking about intellectual property. We're talking about copyright.
Copyright is a subset of intellectual property.
Yes, but the problems that copyright has, I wouldn't say it's a subset. I'd say that copyright was created with the preconceived or predicated notion of intellectual property.
Okay.
However, I think copyright could be applied even in a world in which intellectual property doesn't exist in that way. Essentially, the way I view it, I'll meet you halfway and say that copyright as it is, yes, is predicated on intellectual property and is broken. However, copyright as a pragmatic notion for protecting creators or producers or art or authors, as you say, is a good thing. It just needs to... There are aspects of it that rely more heavily on that predication that if you change that predication to something else, it would work fine. It would work in a much better way. I guess, for example, again, the car notion, I don't really like. It's physical, it's different, because in reality, you can change it and you can do this anyway. Like, the design of automobiles today is copyrighted. Not any...
No, it's patented, but...
Okay, but...
Which is different, actually.
It is different, but they both still kind of come from the idea of intellectual property.
Yes, but the thing that's different about patents is that they're public record. So if I want to know how my car works, I can go pull up the patent document and see inside and out exactly how it works.
Sure.
This is not the case with copyright.
Okay, fair enough, but copyright... Okay, how about this? We've been talking all about software, right?
Uh-huh.
I feel like one of the biggest problems that people have with copyright and software is that it's taking a concept that was applied to media, books, and applying it to something that more replicates a machine. So in the case, I think we might be in a case where software falls outside the norm of what copyright was designed to do. Because, for example, I know how the book works that I'm reading that's copyrighted. That's the point. You read it, You look through every single page. You know exactly.
There's nothing about how it works beyond the paper.
Right. And the story written on it is really what's being copyrighted.
Correct.
The organization of those words. And I can see exactly how they're organized because that's the point. Software is different. It's not like that. I think software maybe should be treated more on a patent basis. And I think that's kind of what I had it in my head anyway, because I thought that was more, I think that's more adequate for what it actually is. For example, because software is a machine. It is. It's a machine. By definition, software in motion is the machine, just like the design of your car realized is a machine. When you put it in an environment it's supposed to be in, cars on roads or not on roads, or cars on solid land, and software in...
Some software running on a microcontroller is no different than had I designed a dedicated circuit for it. It's just that it's...
Exactly.
The only thing that's different is how I made it.
Right. And just like a Civic is no different than a truck, really, they do the same thing. They fulfill the same purpose. One does certain things better than others, but they're still operating in the same environment. They're driving on roads or maybe off-road. They're tires touching solid ground, or in the worst cases not, and it's probably destroyed anyway. But software's the same way. It's running in an environment that it's designed for. But this is circuitry, So no, I think that software should be patented. I think if we changed the way we view software from copyright to being patented, that would be a lot better. Because I think that's kind of how I was treating it most of this debate anyway. Because to be honest, I wasn't fully aware of the difference between copyright and patents. I thought for all intents and purposes they were the same. Because they both ensure you a monopoly for a period of time.
Correct. That is the only thing they have in common.
Okay, but that's pretty much what they do. Like, that's why they exist. They both fulfill the same purpose.
No. No. So the purpose of copyright was, as you already pointed out, was to be applied to media,
right?
In which there is no secret about how it works.
Exactly. Copyright was designed for something that you had to make public, and it was easier to copy. Whereas patents take something
the purpose of a patent is to encourage the designers of machines to publish their designs, so that when they die, their design doesn't die with them.
Right. Well, okay, that's their secondary purposes. But like, patents also guarantee you protection because machines take a lot longer to get ready than books do, generally.
Sure.
A lot more effort goes into those and a lot more investment.
But the principle behind it as to why a patent is better on a societal level is that reason, that on a now I'm of course I'm going to speak in generic language that might be objectionable, but regardless, we societally are okay giving up our freedom to make copies of somebody else's machine in exchange for giving an incentive to the creator of the machine to publish in detail the way their machine works, so that eventually everyone knows how it works and we can make our own versions of it.
Sure. But with copyright, there is nothing that the public, beyond paying for something, can give the person who created it, because how it is, because I guess the difference is you can't copyright how a book was written. You don't know what that person went through to write that book. For example.
And it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter, and not only that, but the book itself is the result, and it is the self-explaining result of what it is, whereas machines are not. And I think software is a good example to talk about these things, even though it was difficult for us. And admittedly, I think we talked past each other a lot in this, but we discovered some things that we hadn't thought about before. I did anyway. Because software is a weird hybrid between the two almost, because it is written. And if you look at code on a page, it's like reading a book. It tells you exactly how it works and what it does. It's the design and the machine. It's the melding of the two. So, but which one is it more like? And so I think for the case, I think if I were to have been able to lock the case back for books, movies, etc., we would have had a different debate about copyright, because it would have narrowed the scope a little more. I think we maybe had the scope a bit broad. And I think we both had slightly different ideas of what the scope was, which led to us talk past each other. But no, I think I think in the case of software, copyright is a bad solution. I will concede on that, because I agree. And in substitute, I would propose that patents would do a better job of achieving what copyright is already achieving for people who write code, and the reason people copyright their code. If they were to patent it, they would benefit the same, because you already give away the designs to everyone who buys one. Just uncompile it, and there it is.
Well,
Run through
it's
a
not.
decompiler. It's not that easy.
It isn't that easy.
But with enough time, the design can be extracted.
With enough time, any machine can be reverse engineered, but that's not the same as publishing the design.
No, it's not. But it's also not as easy to just copy a machine either. And it's not as easy to just make the machine as it is to make the code. In some cases, I'm not going to go down that road. That's a bad tangent to go down, because that's more subjective. Well, what do you mean by it's hard to do this? But either way, I think it's better to treat. I think I would propose that we treat code like it should be a machine and it should be patented, as opposed to copyrighted, because that, I think, would better serve the goal. It would preserve the things that copyright from the author's side would want to preserve. The actual person writing the code, not the, copyright companies and the publishers and all that, but the person actually writing the code would get the benefit of of being able to have protections over what they've created in a limited monopoly, and public gets the benefit of knowing it as soon as that monopoly's up, it's fair game, and they have it all, and they can just go, And another thing, since we're already down the software tangent, people already are not using copyright, but also still exercising monopolies over their software anyway, because of the same thing that brought about the copyright discussion in the modern world anyway, the internet. I don't have to give you my code anymore. I can run it on my machine, and you can send me your inputs over the internet. I can run them on my machine, and I can hold my property, and then you pay for me as a service. And that's kind of what we're seeing anyway. Everything's moving to service-based, which in and of itself might be the market's answer to this problem. Who knows? But I think as far as, and it, maybe 10 years from now, people, and maybe ourselves, will look at it and go, this was a stupid debate to have, because software just we don't look at software like desktop applications anymore. It's not like that. We're not limited in that way anymore, because computers are able to, the infrastructure network, the internet, is able to carry that load now. So
I don't know that this discussion will be over by then, but that's a topic for a different time.
It really is. And are we good on the debate?
I think so.
Good, because that was terrible. For the record, I do not support copyright. This was my best attempt to argue for it, and it was painful, because I was fully aware of a lot of the fallacious things that I said, and I had to go there, because I'm sorry, if the premise is bad, you can't defend it any other way but badly, in my opinion. I tried to pull the stops that I could out to, you obviously take the author's side when you make the copyright debate almost all the time, because that's the perspective you can exploit the most for it. God, that was hard. The mental gymnastics I had to put myself through. I think that I need to sue you for harm.
I'm not sorry.
But no, I will say I agree with everything you said, even though it may have sounded like I was really trying to fight back against the point. It deep down was not genuine, and I can't. That was hard to do. I did not enjoy that one bit.
So you ready to be on the defending side again next week?
I think it's your turn to be on the defending side. I think I'm gonna make you do it. I'm gonna take the pity bucks I got from this one and cash them in already on making you defend something, because it sucks. It sucks a lot when you don't believe it, and the arguments behind why it's bad, and there are no good answers in place. In all fairness, that's why I took it to the pragmatic place also. I could not wait to get out of principles, because I was like, I'm gonna lose on that hill. In the pragmatic world, it's a little easier to wiggle room on uncertainty, because the real world's uncertain. Oh man, that was hard. I have a headache, actually, a small headache brewing from that. Oof.
Well, I think we'll leave it at that.
I think we will. So I guess we'll see you next time when David actually defends something.
No promises.
Philosophers.
Fauxlosophers.